My name is Casey McKeel, and to get us going tonight, to begin our meeting, I'm just going to read the letter, which we dropped off here 1 week ago. To the Baltimore Development Corporation. We, the endorsers of this letter, totaling around 400 people, feel that it's time to have a little talk. The Baltimore Development Corporation should, as a publicly funded organization entrusted with the public mission of promoting local economic development, be accountable to the city's residents. Instead, we find that the BDC uses technicalities and legal loopholes to hide from democratic control and accountability behind its technical status as a private nonprofit, making deals ostensibly in the name of Baltimore, and more often than not, involving Baltimore's tax dollars, without Baltimore getting any real effective say in what those deals are. This is unacceptable and untenable situation. More specifically, there are 3 core problems in the operations of the BDC that must be urgently addressed. First of all, the BDC's lack of transparency. Despite a landmark 2006 ruling which established that the BDC is legally obligated to comply with the Maryland Open Meetings Act, no real transparency in the BDC's operations have been established. Exemptions and omissions have kept the BDC's operations squarely hidden from public scrutiny. If you're going to be a publicly funded with public money and use the public money to advance a development agenda, the public has a right to know what it is you're doing and how. Secondly, the BDC's lack of commitment to economic human rights. For decades, the BDC and its predecessors have focused on redeveloping Baltimore's Inner Harbor and Central Business District, on the assumption that economic well-being and prosperity would trickle down to the city's residents through the jobs new projects in these areas would create. What we've seen increasingly is a downtown where labor standards are next to non-existent, and where developers and employers are never held to account on failing to live up to their promises. The BDC needs to ensure that all city-supported development results in good jobs with living wages and dignity, through binding agreements with clawback provisions that take back subsidies when these benefits don't materialize. Lastly, the BDC's lack of vision and popular participation. There's no meaningful participation of any Baltimore community in the operations of the BDC except for a seat at the table reserved for the well-connected elite business community. We need an economic development agency that works for us and with us, letting us determine the priorities to be pursued and the strategies to be followed. In an era of extraordinary financial crisis, which has shattered economic assumptions and revealed the practical and moral bankruptcy of the development status quo, we need to reinvent and reconstruct the way local economic development works. We need a BDC that works for a better Baltimore, and not just for a better Inner Harbor. A BDC that supports green jobs and sustainable infrastructure. A BDC that operates to democratize wealth in Baltimore's local economy rather than subsidizing the profits of the 1% and the multinational corporate sector. In order for this to happen, Baltimore's neighborhoods, unions, and community groups need a seat at the table and a voice in the development process. We hereby call upon the Baltimore Development Corporation to account for their conduct and their shortcomings in the areas above, and to work with the residents of the city in whose interests they claim to operate to address these pressing problems. Because so many of these problems have the BDC's lack of transparency at their root, we are calling upon officials of the BDC to meet with us here today. So thank you for coming, and I'm going to pass it over to John.
And I want to echo Casey and say thank you for coming. I don't think we expected it when we first drafted this letter. And I want to fill in a little of the context here. The open letter that we drafted and circulated was a statement of principles. It wasn't a detailed analysis of the problems facing our city. And these problems, some of these problems are exacerbated by certain aspects of the way urban development happens here. I want to begin today by just filling in a couple of these details, not to do a comprehensive accounting, this is not the time for that, but merely to set the stage a little better for why we're here today. In our complaint, we highlighted three key areas of concern. Let's start first with the issue of transparency. Now, it's a fact that the BDC has fought in court for the right to keep information about its activities from the public. This would be acceptable, if regrettable, if the BDC was a run-of-the-mill nonprofit. But the BDC is not only funded almost entirely by the city of Baltimore, but it's under contract with the city to carry out a public mission. Common sense and the courts agree. The BDC is required to disclose information about its operations to the public. Now, there's a lot to be argued here. What exactly does the 2006 judgment in BDC versus Carmel Realty Associates mean in practice? What kind of exemptions are legitimate under the Open Meetings Act of the state of Maryland? This is not, I think, the time to get overly technical and legalistic, however. What's at stake is not exactly the letter of the law, but the ability of the BDC to relate, in good faith, to the public it claims to serve. A small example. I can go to the website of the New York City Economic Development Corporation. This is an entity much structured, much like the BDC, serves exactly the same function in a much higher stakes context. I can see detailed meeting minutes on their website. I can download their executive board, their board meetings, their executive committee meetings, read all about things that they're dealing with private developers. Why is this not possible here in Baltimore? The second major issue in our complaint was around the issue of ethics. The BDC is supported by public money so that it can ostensibly serve the public good. If the development projects the BDC initiates and sustains enrich developers while hurting workers and communities, that's a problem. We need economic development. Nobody here is going to argue that we don't need economic development. But we also need other things. We need a sustainable economy. We need an economy that pays living wages. We need to stop writing developers blank checks and start making them sign binding community benefits agreements instead. And I want to say that we have here today a couple of organizations that have been fighting for a better Baltimore precisely around some of these issues. We have the United Workers here, as well as somebody here from Be More Local, fighting around the planned 25th Street development in Remington. And they've come up against the BDC in both of those struggles, so I want to let them speak for themselves to eliminate this point further. And finally, the last complaint we have has to do with participation. Is it really the case that the only way the BDC can imagine economic development happening is behind closed doors? Are we really supposed to just be quiet and take whatever trickle-down medicine gets prescribed as a cure for our needs? Does the need for economic development trump the need for real, and not just rubber stamp after-the-fact democracy? A case in point is the issue of one particular strategy, and again, this is just one example. One particular set of strategies used widely by the BDC as it finances private development projects here in the city of Baltimore. We have so-called pilots, payments in lieu of taxes, and so-called TIFs, tax increment financing. A pilot in Baltimore lets the developer off the hook for 95% of their property taxes in order to make a given private development project financially feasible. A TIF, slightly more complicated, uses a projected rise in property taxes as a way of subsidizing development in the present. There's a number of mechanisms by which that happens. But the big picture here is what that both of these mechanisms do in effect is to sort of quasi-privatize tax revenues in a kind of opaque and technocratic way. They take them out of the flow of the normal way in which tax revenue is collected and spent, and channels it more towards the aims and goals of private development projects. Now, if we're going to have to subsidize private development with public money in order to make it feasible, why don't we, the public, get a voice into the development process, get meaningful input into that process? Right now, there's very little meaningful participation at the city or neighborhood level in the front end of the democratic process, the development process. Decisions come to us, right? They come to the city council, right? But they come for approval. We don't get a chance to actually shape which alternatives are actually pursued. The way I would like to talk about it is that Baltimore residents are basically presented with a menu. The menu only has one option on it, and they're told they can either choose what's being offered or they can go hungry. And I'd like to think, and I think we'd like to think, that something else is possible. That the residents of this city can be empowered to participate in the development done in their name. In cities like Chicago and New York City over the past couple of years, lawmakers are beginning, and policy advocates, policy agency people are beginning to find inspiration in models of participatory budgeting and planning that have been developed very carefully and very rigorously over the past decades and deployed so successfully in places like Porto Alegre in Brazil. Why can't something like this happen in Baltimore as well? These are the kind of questions we wanted to raise today. And in order to put a sharper point on this, we have a couple of people who are going to offer some brief testimonies around some specific issues. Reverend Heber Brown here? Yeah. Yes. Heber, why don't you come up to the table? And please welcome Pastor Heber Brown III.
Brody, everybody, good evening. Good to see you all. I just wanted to kind of give just a perspective on this whole issue from my vantage point. And for me, it comes down to my critique of the Baltimore Development Corporation comes down to a theory and a practice that does not fit, I believe, with the majority, especially with the majority people of this city, which is the black community of Baltimore City. When I think about the theory and the practice that the BDC uses, it really kind of is like a just trust me, we know what's best for you type of mentality and practice. And I really don't see the black community particularly involved and a part of some of the development things that are going on in the city of Baltimore. There's a scripture in the biblical, in the New Testament of the Bible, it says, you shall know a tree by the fruit it bears. And if that scripture is true, and I believe it does hold a lot of weight, when I examine the fruit that's on the tree of the Baltimore Development Corporation and consider that it's a mentality and a practice that has helped to produce some of the discouraging realities of uptown, even as I sit amongst these very nice buildings downtown, but we go a few blocks over, we go a few blocks up. In uptown, particularly in the black community, I see the fruit of 40,000 vacant buildings with 3,500 homeless people in this city. That's some strange fruit to me, you know. I see schools being closed down in Baltimore City when new schools are not built up at the same rate. That's strange fruit. To me, I see the almost complete decimation of the black community in East Baltimore, where Hopkins and EBDI have cleared out whole swaths of the black community to make way for the continuing expansion of the Hopkins complex, and that's strange fruit to me. And so when I think about what's wrong with the BDC and my critique of the BDC, it comes down to that strange fruit, and it comes down to the lack of participation, the lack of input, and the lack of transparency and accountability, particularly when it comes to the majority community in this city. It was difficult for me to get down here today, to tell you the truth. I'm a father, I'm a husband, in addition to pastoring and all that great stuff. But it's difficult for me to come down here. And number one, I got to find a parking space. Number two, I got to have my 3-year-old tagging behind me and make sure he's okay. Continuing on, I got to pay for parking, then I got to... And so in another sense, I'm also looking around, and I'm also want to speak up for those who are not here. I'm speaking up for the women who clean the buildings of the BDC and clean the buildings of these hotels and skyscrapers down here. Maybe they couldn't come here today because they got children back home. They got to make sure their children are fed. But I hear their voices. I hear their critique, and I hear their complaints about all that's wrong with Baltimore City. Now, is the BDC responsible for everything? No, but you at the table. You're sitting with people. You are involved in decision-making in this city, whereby if you are involved in it, then this night presents me and many of those who can't make it tonight an opportunity to have a meeting of accountability and a meeting to speak up on what's going on and the presentation of what can be. The BDC, as it has been, does not mean that it has to be that way going forward. As it has been, it's been arranged around a mentality that wanted to kind of get away from bossism and wanted to kind of remove a little bit away from the political patronage and favor-making. But that was born out of a particular context. Perhaps it's time for a new kind of BDC, where we have more meetings like this, open air, where we sit together, where we're together talking about and dreaming about what's the future and what the vision of Baltimore City can be. I believe you're a very smart man, very intelligent man, but there are many other smart, intelligent, visionary people in this city. And I just say, what would happen if we all got together, young and old, different ethnicities, different backgrounds. We sat down and we dreamed together, as opposed to us allowing the BDC to try and dream for us. We can do better together. Thank you.
Okay, next I'd like to ask Ben Ray from Be More Local to come up.
Hey, Mr. Brody, nice to see you. Thank you for coming out. My name's Ben Ray. I'm speaking on behalf of a community organization called Be More Local. We focus on ideally what we think to be smart development in Baltimore City. We first started butting heads a little bit specifically with the development of 25th Street Station in Remington, which we did not think to be a smart development in Baltimore City, and unfortunately the BDC thought otherwise. Our belief is the community ought to have a say in how they're being developed. Our experience with the Baltimore Development Corporation was that not the entire community had a say in the way Baltimore was being developed, or at least our neighborhood. We actively believe in community benefits agreements. We want to see Baltimore enact community benefits agreement legislation. How does the BDC feel about community benefits agreements? Our feeling is that the BDC represents backwards development in Baltimore City, specifically in dealing with the 25th Street Station. Nobody approached the community and said, hey, what do you guys want in this neighborhood? We were told this is what you guys are going to get in this neighborhood. And what we were told we were going to get was large corporate, out-of-state retail, big box development, Lowe's, Walmart. It's not what we wanted, it's not what we needed, and the reason we believed that we were getting that development was specifically because it's not what we needed. There's no hardware desert in North Baltimore. There were 6, 7, 8 community hardware stores already servicing the community. There was no grocery desert in northern Baltimore. There were within a 4-mile radius, there was at least half a dozen grocery stores. So we felt that we didn't actually need this development, but we could use the development there. But nobody ever approached us and asked us what we needed. People told us what we were going to get. People told us that it was a done deal. People told us not to fight it and just sit back and enjoy it. We didn't respond that way, and we formed Be More Local to try and affect some sort of change. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to take the promises that the developers have been going around to community organization and make to these community organizations and have that as some form of legislation, so that when they promise us jobs, they deliver us jobs. When they promise us environmental green development, they actually deliver us environmental green development. Every step along the way, Baltimore City and the BDC was absent in helping us with that, and our feeling is the BDC was actually actively petitioning against us in testimony through the City Council to prevent that from happening. So my feeling is that the BDC should be more representative of the community. I'd like to see a community element in the Baltimore Development Corporation. I don't personally know what a quasi-developmental corporation is. I know what a government is, and a government should be us. I don't know what a corporation is, but I'd like to see the BDC become more of a government and less of a corporation. Thank you.
Okay, and we have one more testimony before we're going to give Brody a chance to respond to some of these concerns and questions. And that's Juan Paredes from the United Workers.
Buenas noches. Buenas noches a todos y bienvenidos. Me llamo Juan Paredes. Yo soy un ex trabajador de Lille Harbor. Trabajé allí por 14 años. Ahora soy un miembro del Consejo de Derechos Humanos de Trabajadores Unidos. Yo quiero agradecer a los organizadores de este evento, otro BDC es posible, por darnos la oportunidad de hablar aquí. Yo quiero agradecer a los organizadores de este evento, otro BDC es posible, por darnos la oportunidad de hablar aquí. Los trabajadores de Lille Harbor son parte del 99% y estamos muy animados de ver el compromiso del movimiento de ocupación de los derechos del trabajador. Nosotros nos sentimos en solidaridad con este movimiento y la esperanza de una economía justa para todos.
Hello everybody, my name is Juan Paredes. I am an ex-worker at the Inner Harbor.
I worked there for 14 years, and I'm now a member of the Human Rights Committee of the United Workers. I want to thank the organizers of this event and other BDC as possible for giving us the opportunity to speak here. The workers at the Inner Harbor are part of the 99%, and we're very animated to see the commitment that the Occupy movement has given to the rights of workers. We feel we're in solidarity with this movement and share the hope for a just economy for all.
El 25 de octubre del 2008, cientos de trabajadores de sueldos bajos y aliados del pueblo marchamos desde el estadio Camden Yards hacia el Inner Harbor y lo declaramos una zona de derechos humanos. El Harbor ahora es una zona de pobreza. Los trabajadores reciben sueldos de pobreza. Hay el robo sistemático de salarios, hay acoso sexual, hay hostigamiento constante al trabajador. La mayoría de nosotros no tenemos cuidado de salud ni las oportunidades de seguir avanzando con educación. Hemos documentado todo esto en un reporte llamado Escondido a plena vista.
The 25th of October 2008, hundreds of low-wage workers and their allies marched from the Camden Yards Stadium to the Inner Harbor, and we declared it an economic human rights zone. The harbor is currently a poverty zone. Workers receive poverty wages, there's systematic wage theft, there's sexual harassment, and constant harassment of the workers there. The majority of us don't have any health care or opportunities to advance with education. We've documented all of this in a report called Hidden in Plain Sight.
This is a report.
Los trabajadores del Inner Harbor demandamos el derecho de trabajar con dignidad, que incluye sueldos justos, el derecho de cuidado de salud y el derecho de educación. Decidimos llevar nuestras demandas directamente a la parte alta de la cadena de ganancias, los desarrolladores, Cordich y GGP, quienes controlan el Harbor. Les pedimos reunirse con los trabajadores, entrar en un compromiso de desarrollo justo que aseguraría estándares de derechos humanos en el Harbor.
Workers at the harbor demand the right to work with dignity, which includes living wages, the right to health care, and the right to education. We decided to take our demands directly to up through the profit chain, to the developers, to Cordish, to GGP, and the folks that control the harbor. We asked for a meeting between workers to show the commitment to fair development that would guarantee standards for human rights in the harbor.
En julio, Cordich se reunió con el BDC en privado para pedir una rebaja de $3 millones de su renta. El producto de esta rebaja fue para mejorar la apariencia del Harbor. Esta compañía billonaria pide rebaja de renta mientras trabajadores del Inner Harbor tenemos dificultad para pagar la renta de nuestra casa con los sueldos de pobreza que recibimos en el Inner Harbor.
In July, Cordish met with the BDC in private to ask for a $3 million rent reduction. This reduction was asked so that he could improve the appearance of his building in the harbor. This billion-dollar company asked for a rent reduction while workers at the harbor have difficulties paying rent with the poverty wages that we receive at the Inner Harbor.
Por eso marchamos al frente de BDC en agosto y lo hicimos también el último domingo o el domingo pasado para mostrar la necesidad de usar el dinero público para beneficios públicos, no para provecho privado. Trabajos creados no deben mantenerse en los trabajadores en un siglo de pobreza.
That's why we marched in front of the BDC in August and then again 2 Sundays ago, to show the need to use public money for public benefit, not for private benefits. Jobs that are created should not maintain workers in a cycle of poverty.
Para solucionar los abusos del Inner Harbor, y avanzar la meta de desarrollo justo, los Trabajadores Unidos hemos presentado una resolución del Consejo de la Ciudad patrocinado por miembros del Consejo Mary Pat, Clark Sharon, Green Milleron, Warren Branch y Belinda Conaway. Esta resolución reconoce los abusos de los derechos humanos en el Harbor y demanda una consultación formal de 6 meses entre la ciudad, los Trabajadores Unidos y los desarrolladores, el BDC y otros accionistas.
To resolve the abuses at the harbor and to advance the goal of just development, of fair development, United Workers has presented a resolution to the City Council. It's being sponsored by the council members Mary Pat Clark, Sharon Green Middleton, Warren Branch, and Belinda Conaway. This resolution recognizes the human rights abuses at the harbor, and demands a formal consultation of 6 months between the city, the United Workers, the developers, the BDC, and other investors.
Thank you. Pedimos a todos los que están aquí a sostener esta resolución y estar en solidaridad con los Trabajadores Unidos y nuestra lucha para desarrollo justo en nuestra ciudad. No hay una fecha todavía, pero pronto tendremos una audiencia en el Consejo de esta resolución. Esperamos que todos aquí asistan. Gracias otra vez a los organizadores de esta reunión y su compromiso a crear un diálogo a esta ciudad sobre la necesidad de desarrollo justo.
We ask all that are here to help support this resolution and to be in solidarity with the United Workers in our struggle for just development in our city. There's no date set yet for the City Council resolution, but we hope that once we have a date, everyone can attend. Thanks again to the organizers of this meeting and for their commitment in creating a dialogue in the city about the need for just development. Okay, and now I'd like to offer Mr. Brody a chance to respond on behalf of the BDC.
Yo comprendo un poco, señor. I understand only a little bit. In Espanol. I appreciate you coming out. I appreciate you sending me the letter, which I've read several times, and being willing, as Mr. Duda was quoted accurately, I trust, sometimes I'm quoted accurately, sometimes I'm not, in the Daily Record, that you're interested in entering into a dialogue. I like dialogue. I like dialogue better than, non-negotiable demands, better than just statements, and that's the end of the discussion because it's not a discussion. So, I'd like to tell you a little bit about me, a little bit about the BDC, and comment on 1 or 2 points you've raised, but assuming that this is the first, not the second or the third or the last of the conversations that we can have together. I'm rather limited to English, so my wife's family was, Senor was from Navarre, from España, a long time ago, many generations ago. And perhaps you could translate for the gentleman who spoke very fluently in Spanish, in which I'm not. So if you could tell him that my wife's family came from Navarre, from España, many generations ago to raise sheep on the plains of Colorado. My wife has regretfully passed on, but her memory and her family, all of whom spoke Spanish, I should have learned better. Should have been estudiante de español. Anyway, I am the son of immigrants. I'm a first-generation American. That means my father and my mother came with a little suitcase from Russia and Poland and the clothes on their back. And my father came with a brown bag of Russian black bread and hard-boiled eggs through Ellis Island in New York. where the name was changed from Berdyshevsky to Brody. Happened to a lot of people. In the old days, they didn't like names that were too long, so they changed them. It's America. I have been working as an architect in different places and at BDC since 1996. We are not perfect. We can do better. I agree with that.
Nowhere near perfect.
Yes. We've made some progress. When I came, having left architecture to come back to Baltimore, where I was born and raised, it was with a couple thoughts in mind. The ancestors of BDC were groups like Charles Center Inner Harbor. They were groups like Market Center. They were groups like BEDCO, which stood for Baltimore Economic Development Corporation. Kurt Schmoke, as mayor, created BDC and put all those groups together. When he asked me to come back to Baltimore, I was not in Baltimore, I said my interest was in making BDC into a neighborhood-oriented organization, for one, and for two, making sure that it dealt in the main with small and medium-sized businesses, not with great corporations. Mayor Schmoke said that was fine, and that he would be supportive of that if I came and took the job. So I did. So the facts of the last, whatever years that number I've been since 1996 at BDC, are in our annual report every year. When we started, we didn't have a website. There weren't any websites. The website is inadequate. We're trying to make it better. We have one, but it needs to be a lot better, and it needs to be a lot more transparent. Should be possible to do. We haven't had people who are good at this. The city has a new gentleman who's the chief information officer, a bright young man from New York called Rico Singleton, who I've asked to try to help us to make the website better, and whatever lessons we can learn from New York, we're happy to learn. So here's what we do. If you haven't read our annual reports, they are print, old-fashioned idea. I think they're on the website, but you should check and tell me if we've missed somehow, or they got wiped out, or you can't find it, or whatever. But every year in the annual report, there's a pie chart. You know pie charts. It's a big pie. It has slices. Before I came, there was no annual report, and there was no pie chart. Since I came, every year, some years are different from others, 75, 80, last year, 94% high of the money available to BDC does not go in downtown Baltimore. It goes into neighborhoods beyond downtown. One could make an argument that parts of downtown are a neighborhood. We don't make that argument. So where does it go? It goes in the 3,700 people last year who came to our small business resource center in the old Eastern High School on 33rd Street, across from where the stadium goes. It goes to 10 Main Street, older commercial areas. Mr. Ray is very familiar with one, 36th Street, the Avenue. Where to go? In Hamden. Right, there you are. Yeah, I live about 2 blocks away on Craigcombe, little street in a row house called Craigcombe Avenue off of Keswick Road. So I use the Avenue. It's where I go, I walk there. So we did with Hamden. Hamden doesn't need us anymore. We're in Pennsylvania Avenue, we're in Belair Edison, we're in Hamilton Lauraville, we're in Brooklyn, we're in Waverly. Those are the kinds of neighborhoods that need us, we're in Eastern Avenue in Highlandtown, near where I grew up. 10 main streets, we'd like to do more, it's about the limit. Next spring, the National Main Street, this is the advertisement, is coming to Baltimore around April the 1st. They're coming here because we run the best Main Street program in the country. We run 2 business incubators that currently have 73 companies in them. These are all startup companies. They're no corporations. And they've given birth to companies like Salar, who are doing what President Obama wants to digitize medical records, and Social Solutions that helps nonprofits keep track of what they're doing and who they're helping. Will Microsoft come out of the Emerging Technology Center? That's our 2 incubators, one in the Can Company and on Boston Street, and another one in the same old Eastern High School. I don't know if they ever will, but every study shows that the future jobs in America are coming from small and medium-sized businesses, not from giant Fortune 500 corporations. So that's where our focus has been. Is the Reverend still here, or he's gone? Where are you? There you are. I just wanted you to know that I know what strange fruit means. Strange fruit hanging on southern trees. Billie Holiday. I know that song. I was the planner when I was much younger and walked with Lena Boone and Fred Jones in every street in Upton and Division Street and Shields Place where Miss Boone lived, and tried to set forth a revitalization plan for Upton, which we worked on until the money ran out, the federal money. And I walked in East Baltimore with Odessa Thomas and Lucille Gorham. Miss Thomas is no longer alive. On Gay, Miss Gorham is, in Gay Street in Old Town, and what then became Middle East. So I think I have some sense that you may not be aware of what neighborhoods in Baltimore are like and what they need. Can BDC provide a little of that? Yes, a little. We're not the housing department, we're not the planning department, we're not lots and lots of other city departments, and we certainly don't control wage rates at the Inner Harbor. To the extent we can read this study, which I had not seen, hidden in plain sight, thank you, I'll have a chance to talk to people about it and see if there's some common ground when working on some of the issues you've raised. So the vision for the future is not big corporations, in my view. It's not downtown, it's Baltimore's neighborhoods, it's small and medium-sized business, and it is what we do every day and every year. So, this is blocking and tackling economic development. This is not glamorous, this gets in no newspaper unless there's a scandal, and there hasn't been. And it's not covered in any medium or the 11 o'clock news because it doesn't bleed. It's just the basic, what we do every day with our 47 people. That's who's at BDC. Not 4,700, not 470, 47. There used to be 9 more, I had to lay them off. Because real human beings, not vacant positions, because that's our budget cuts of the last couple years. So, transparency. Transparency is a good thing. Here's what's happened. Before 2006, we were told by the city law department that we were not under the State Opens Meetings Act. That's what we were told. They were wrong. The court ruled the other way. We have a board. If you look at our board of directors or on the annual report, and I think they're on the website, they consist of private people appointed by the mayor on one hand, about 7, 10, and on the other hand, people who are part of the city administration, the director of finance, the head of the housing department, those kind of people. They run the meetings. I don't run the meetings. The meetings are open unless the board votes to close the meetings. If you don't like their decisions, write to them, send them, shoot them an email, tell them they shouldn't close meetings. Why do they close meetings? Principally because they're dealing with people's private financial information. And the State Opens Meetings Act has exemptions for that. And I don't know how to get around that and to deal with people's private financial information in public and expect those people to ever again want to deal with us because we're revealing their private and competitive financial information. But so that's the problem. If you have a better answer to it, you can tell me or you can tell our board.
The BDC, that's the best answer.
I got you.
This man.
So, you have one to turn? Get the microphone? Sure, you'll have a turn. So, last things of this. Can we do better? Yes. Do we control everything? No. We have nothing to do with EBDI. In East Baltimore, we have nothing to do with all sorts of things. We have to do with economic development, which is commercial and industrial. So that's what we try to do. Can we agree on some things? Perhaps. Only if we sit down and listen to each other and not yell at each other and not issue non-negotiable demands. I don't think, I'll be gone one day. If you've got an answer to that called immortality, you might share it with somebody else because I'm not aware of it. So there'll be someone else for you to deal with. Not Jay Brody, somebody else. There has been a BDC-like organization for 45 years in Baltimore. I gave you the examples of the past. Mayors have seen the usefulness of that kind of organization. We're not civil servants. We can be hired and fired at will. All we do is, rent some space from private sector up here, pay the salaries of the people who work for us, who are more than 85% of the cost of BDC's operating. We don't have fancy quarters. We don't take long trips on the public dole. We don't live in fancy places. We mostly, as I do, live in the city and have a long-term commitment of the city of Baltimore. We do our best. Not everybody agrees with us. Some people would like us disbanded. Some people would like us to go away. Somehow the city will have to participate in economic development. Projects come to us and developers ask for us to think about whether we should support it. That's a board discussion, and the board then recommends to the mayor. There's not a single thing that I know of for which BDC, me or the board, has the final say. Everything we recommend goes to the mayor, the city council, the board of estimates, the city's board of finance. All those people have to approve that kind of jargon that you heard earlier, a pilot, a tax increment district. We recommend. We give the mayor our best economic, professional, objective recommendation. She, that's the mayor, who's a female person, she can accept it, she cannot accept it. The city council can tell us to go pound sand. They don't have to take any recommendations we make. And so you have, I think, opportunity in this republic called the United States of America to go say you disagree. You don't like the 25th Street project. We didn't invent the 25th Street project. It was brought to us by a developer named Rick Walker and said if we thought it was a worthwhile project, would we come to the city council and testify for the bills in front of the city council? I did that because I think Baltimore neighborhoods are tremendously underserved in 2011 in America by decent retail. So we have helped facilitate 20-some grocery stores in Baltimore neighborhoods in the last, my tenure here, in the last 12 years plus or minus. We've brought Safeways and Giants, we've brought Aldi's, we've brought Save-A-Lots. We're trying to bring ShopRite from Philadelphia to the Howard Park site on Liberty Heights and Hillsdale and Gwynn Oak. We continue to try because Baltimore neighborhoods are full of mom and pop stores with unhealthy food and marked up prices, and they're not what Baltimoreans, including everybody here, deserves. So that's been a key effort by us. We're not anywhere near finished, but I just acquaint you with some of the stuff that again doesn't make newspapers because it doesn't seem to be newsworthy. I appreciate you listening to me for probably more than 7 minutes, and I would like to think that we could enter into some further civilized conversations, whether we end up agreeing a little or a lot. If we disagree, I'd like to think we can disagree without being disagreeable. So our doors are going to be open for conversations. It's a little hard to squeeze you in our board meeting room, which holds maybe 40 people, and that's about it. So if there's a delegation of people that we could continue to meet and talk with, that might be helpful. Or if you have, it's going to get colder one day. So this meeting, although useful, is probably going to be a little more difficult to hold in the ensuing months. But as long as I'm around, I am happy and willing to have dialogue, and wherever it goes, it goes. So I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
So I do again want to thank you for coming out here today. We have a couple of more things. We've been circulating some forms for people to write some questions and concerns, which we're going to be publishing on this website, but also submitting to the BDC. We wanted to find out if you'd be willing to stick around for a little while longer and hear just a couple of those.
Stick around
Till 6? Okay. I believe we have 5 people who are going to come up here and sort of briefly voice some concerns and questions for you.
My name is Daniel Sparks.
All right, I got it.
I was asked what I thought was wrong with the Baltimore Development Corporation, and I think it boils down mainly to 3 points. 1, there is a lack of transparency. 2, a lack of representation from local neighborhood, labor, and faith organizations. And 3, to prompt a tendency to subsidize private sector enterprises with our public money without regards to medium to long-term impacts on local neighborhoods, the workers at those enterprises, and both the urban and physical environment. And I think it comes off that, and the BDC is certainly not alone to blame here, but also City Hall and many of the institutions in this city have, over the past years, going back decades, have come across, in the eyes of many of the average people in Baltimore, as either unwilling or unable to care about our concerns. And depending on which that is, I want to start with, let's assume that for the moment they're unable to. Well, if they're unable to, then I think that, to use some corporate speak here, that it's time for some structural adjustment programs to the BDC, and that we don't want apologies or sweet talk. What we want is results. And I think speaking of the structural adjustment program, I think I'll lay out a couple of the basic skeletal ribs that we can expand upon here. The first being, let's expand the BDC Executive Board, the decision-making body, to include representatives from local, neighborhood, and labor organizations. Let's at least get the people who represent us in there, and then if we can get that, we'll develop our program for voting for those people and putting them in there. 2, make all meetings on all topics, at all times, fully open to the public, and allow time and space for public comment and input. And finally, 3, have a website on which the transcripts of everything said at these meetings is available online, so it is forever in the public record, both online and hard copy. And that would be a great place and I think that would be a great place to start on fixing the inability of the BDC to address many of our problems. Thank you. We've got a couple more.
Hi, my name is Erin Bowles, and I'm the employee and the daughter of a small business owner in Baltimore. And I just have one major concern for the BDC. It's for myself, for my family, and for other small business owners. I would like the BDC to save the small businesses and to prevent corporations from pushing us out. Small businesses can't compete with corporate costs, and we need to be protected too.
Hello. I'm reading a question from someone in the audience.
Okay.
Their question is, are you willing to meet regularly with a delegation of citizens who have signed this letter to discuss the actions of the BDC and the impact those actions have on the Baltimore community?
I think I said yes already. You going to say yes again? I think I said yes to that in my remarks. I would like such a group to be, this may sound, well, I'll just say it. I would like such a group to be representative. I would like it to be diverse racially. As the Reverend pointed out, the notion of black folks being a minority in Baltimore is simply wrong. It's not true, right? So African Americans are the majority people in Baltimore City. So if we were to meet with a group of delegation, I would expect there to be a sizable number of those people are African Americans. I would expect to be a representative number of those people to be Latinos, senor. I would expect a representative number of those people to be women. And that's what I would mean by meeting with a diverse group of folks. If that's possible, you have my answer, yes, I'm willing to meet.
Sounds good to me. I think we have one last person who wanted to ask a question, and then we're going to wrap up with some specific suggestions that we had kind of come up with.
Good evening. My name is Veronica Dorsey. I'm a leadership organizer with the United Workers. And also, sir, I'd like to say hello because didn't you used to be the director of housing?
Long ago.
I know. I used to work for Schaefer and Kirk Schmoke and Du Burns, and I remember you very well.
I was taller.
Yeah, you were. You were. And you had a little less hair.
Yeah, I had a lot of different hair.
Well, anyway, I know from personal experience in community organizing that work that's supposed to be sustainable and economic and social progress must come through a democratic process that identifies the true needs among the people and responds accordingly. And so what I really mean is the people in the community really knows what they need. So maybe if you can involve us in some of these meetings, we can tell you what we need and then we can get what we want.
Okay, so because Ms. Brody has to go, because it's getting dark and cold out, I want to wrap this up with just letting you know about a couple of the suggestions we came up with as possible things to be discussed to move forward with making economic development in Baltimore more participatory, more democratic, and more accountable. The first is this very basic thing that I believe you agreed to, technology permitting, is getting the meeting minutes posted on the BDC website as a token indication of a desire to act in good faith according to the spirit of the Open Meetings Act and of the general requirements of public transparency. Next, clawbacks. If a private project gets public subsidies because it's supposed to deliver a public benefit, these benefits need to be made explicit. And there needs to be so-called clawback mechanisms, right? They're going to claw back that public subsidy if those benefits fail to materialize. Next, living wages. If a development project is supported with public funds, the workers employed in the completed finished project need to be paid a living wage, period. Next, more clear advocates for workers and communities on the BDC board. This is something we heard a lot of people mention today. This could either be through new appointments, this could even be through mechanisms like direct election. Next, opening up participation and bringing back some democracy to some of the most opaque mechanisms involved in development in Baltimore. One slightly wonky suggestion we had was that 20% of all tax revenue that's normally diverted from a tax increment financing district, and 20% of all incremental taxes that are ordinarily foregone under a payment in lieu of taxes agreement, a pilot agreement, that money should be collected as it normally would be, but then earmarked for direct participatory budgeting processes where the community would actually get to decide what to do with that money. So if we need to subsidize private development with public funds, we should also use that as a way to enable really radical public participation in the development process at the same time. Finally, the creation and funding of an independently appointed Office of Community Participation and Advocacy within the BDC to make sure that they have the capacity to let us engage with the development process, that they have the capacity to empower us to participate in the decisions that affect our economic lives as citizens here.
Before they're made for us.
Before they're made for us, and yes. So at the front end of the process rather than a rubber stamp at the end. So with that, we're going to close today's meeting. This is, I hope, the start of a dialogue, and I'll thank Mr. Brody for coming out. We'll be posting the comments that have been, everybody has been filling out online. There will be more events in the future, and we'll be putting together a delegation to talk with the BDC in the future. Thank you.
Very courageous of you to do this, and people appreciated you. They didn't do much heckling.
I didn't feel particularly courageous. I didn't feel particularly threatened.
Well, what
Some
else?
of my colleagues were worried about me. I said, come on.
My name is Donna. I live at 37th and Chestnut. I hope that we trip over each other sometimes.
Well, I'm sure I'll see you around.
The neighborhood.
I'll see you around.
In terms of specificity, the next step could be that they would meet with you about some of these development issues.
Sure.
And when it gets cold, Code Blue is going to step in. Will people then be made to move rather than facing freezing conditions?
I'm sorry.
When people are down here at Occupy Baltimore in front of the Meyer Hall,
I have nothing to do with. I don't.
That waterfall, McKelton Plaza.
No, I know where they are. I've gone through and said hi to them and said keep at it.
And
yeah, but I don't have any. There's a whole. The mayor has a homeless service coordinator, and it's not me.
So you foresee these people meeting with you about development issues, creating communities?
About what we do, yes.
Okay, so that could be maybe some housing.
Yeah,
for
I'm not useful to discuss things that we have no power over.
And what you do have power over specifically
is economic development projects. That's what the city set us up to do.
And There could also maybe be some small developments where people could get housing who have those kinds of jobs at those kinds of businesses.
Well, there's a housing department. That's their job. I mean, they get millions and millions of dollars of federal funds. They get state funds. We don't see any of that. So there's a housing department. There's a gentleman there named Peter Engel that you should talk to. Peter's job is to produce more affordable housing for the city.
So your
Again,
role,
that's not what we do.
and what you do,
Yes.
we could
Is economic development.
Your economic development
Only.
would allow for economically developing
Yes.
small business.
Absolutely, and I touched on some of our particular activities directly in that line. So Paul Taylor runs the Small Business Resource Center.
Now where Eastern High School
A lady named Ann Lansinger runs the Emerging Technology Center. Yeah.
and at Mr. Jefferson's University where you were honor student.
As a listener to this,
Yes.
one thing I'm going to walk away
Yes.
with is that wages at Harbor Place
Right.
are so low as to leave people in poverty. It's
I don't know, but
horrible.
I'll find out.
Cordish ought to be
Yes.
laughed out of the room,
Yes.
not invited into the room, if that's true. In other words, it's not you do approve or you don't approve. There are people you should deal with and there are people you should not deal with. And if one looked at that
Yes.
report that that man
Which
gave
I will, I'll
and
read
found
it.
there was truth to it,
Yes.
it has to do with where he's invited.
Okay.
And you can say something on it.
Of course I can. And I'm going to read it first and
Yeah.
think about it.
Because that was absolutely so sad to
I
me.
spoke to Lane a couple of months ago. She called me. Yes. Yeah, I hadn't seen her or heard from her for ages.
Yep, she's still doing her thing.
Absolutely.